What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review episode 9 of House of the Dragon. This is my favorite time of the week where I get to talk about this show. This episode was directed by Claire Kilner and written by Sarah Hess. And there's a lot to talk about with this episode. I thought it was a little kind of sloppier than your typical episode in comparison to the way these scenes were depicted in the book, but still tons of fun all the same. And I thought there were a few really interesting changes and a few stranger, kind of more questionable changes, but always good fun to discuss because, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, this is the gold standard of television. This is the gold standard of fantasy storytelling, and definitely the gold standard when it comes to adapting cool books into a different medium. So even if I have a few quibbles, just remember that it all comes from a place of love. And before I go any further, if you have not yet seen the episode or the teaser for next week's episode, go do so because I'm going to be sinking my teeth into all of it. But first and foremost, I just want to say that after having watched the season finale of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power a couple days ago, and now watching this, it's such a relief to watch a show where you can tell the showrunners actually have a love and affection for the source material. And when they make changes, they at least try to with a sense of purpose, where they have the love for the material but the talent to make it their own, because once TV is a different medium from fiction, and you have to make some changes just to make it live and breathe and thrive as a drama. And I feel like this episode gives us examples where they succeed on that front, but also perhaps where they stumble a bit, but I'll get to all of that in due time. But the main thrust of this episode is all about what do the Greens do after the unfortunate demise of King Viserys. And I think this show, it's going to be a bit of an adjustment for us to not have Viserys in each and every episode because he's so goddamn good. And also this episode, we never got to see Rhaenyra, nor did we get to see Daemon. And so it was interesting to get such a heavy emphasis on the Greens, Alicent, Otto, Aegon the Elder, now Aegon the second of his name, as well as his brother Aemond and their sister Helena, as well as obviously people like Kristen Cole, as well as I should just give a shout out early on to avoid confusion. There are twin brothers in the Kingsguard, both of whom have the same name of Eric Cargill, but one spells his name E-R-R-Y-K, and the other spells his name A-R-R-Y-K. So when you see those two twins, just call them Eric, but just know that they are spelled differently, and they do have, as we see in this episode, different loyalties, but this show never misses an opportunity to create confusion with the viewer, but that comes straight out of the book. But the first big scene is the Green Council, which is held just before dawn after Otto and Alicent learn about the death of King Viserys. And like in the book, Lord Beesbury, the Master of Coin, when Lord Beesbury realizes that the Green Council has been kind of preparing contingency plans in case they needed to seize the throne, he accuses them of regicide and seizure. And in the book, he just gets thrown in jail, or I believe he gets thrown in jail. But in the show, Kristen Cole just slams his head down and kills him then and there. It was pretty gnarly, and they just proceed with the meeting with the dead body bleeding onto the table. It's funny how sometimes the show is more ruthless in the book, and sometimes it's less so. It's always interesting to see where they zig and zag. But like in the book, they try to keep the death a secret as long as possible so that they can lock down all their plans and get their guy, Aegon, on the throne before Rhaenyra hears anything about it. And that includes locking up servants. That includes imprisoning any lord who refuses to bend the knee. And it also includes locking Rhaenys in her chambers. And that's a big departure from the book because Rhaenys was not in King's Landing during this seizure, at least as it was originally written by George R.R. Martin. But I must confess, I was hoping for a longer scene with the Green Council. It's a pretty massive scene in the book, and I recognize it's difficult to dramatize a bunch of people sitting around a table and making it riveting and exciting every step of the way. But unlike in the book, we see Alicent pushing back a little bit against her father, Otto. Otto's all for just killing Rhaenyra, killing Daemon, whereas Alicent's pushing hard for Rhaenyra to be given an opportunity to bend the knee and acknowledge Aegon as the new king. But I think my favorite moment of that entire scene is when Otto says, "The door remains shut until we finish our business." He's just so goddamn hardcore. I love that character to death. And they also bring up the big variable, the big X factor, which will be explored in the finale of what's going to happen with Storm's End, because Storm's End, they have a family tie through Rhaenys to be on the opposing side. And so as the Civil War starts to take shape, all the major kingdoms in Westeros are going to be forced to choose sides. So strategically, it's going to be very important to lock down who's on whose side very early on. And Storm's End historically has always been one of the strongest of the Seven Kingdoms. But a huge chunk of this episode is all about trying to figure out where the hell Aegon even is, and that does come from the book, but they found a way to stretch his absence into a pretty juicy subplot. And in the book, it's a little bit more sordid, it's a little bit more sexual, but it's interesting seeing Otto's agents going looking for him and Alicent's agents going looking for him, and basically having a little race to get their hands on him first, because Alicent wants to encourage Aegon to have mercy on Rhaenyra, and Otto's all about trying to persuade Aegon to have zero mercy. So there's a little bit of like a ticking clock scenario, which I felt was interesting. Also, it's just cool seeing Cole and Aemond in disguise running around King's Landing. Aemond is just so hardcore and so lethal and so badass, and just seeing him with like a hood and the eye patch, it's like he seems like a badass Dungeons and Dragons character. And while this hunt is underway, we see that Aemond, like his uncle Daemon, is not so secretive about his desire to sit on the Iron Throne. I mean, Aegon spends all of his time screwing around, drinking and whoring and talking about sailing away, whereas Aemond trains every day, studies history, studies philosophy. He's obviously a very disciplined, intense individual. And so once again, it's like Aemond and Daemon are my two favorite characters in this brewing civil war, and they have a lot of similar characteristics. And also, I'm just now realizing, I should probably warn you, there will be at least one time in this video where I get some of the names like Aegon or Aemond or Daemon mixed up, because they all sound pretty goddamn similar. So as the hunt is underway, we get a lot of interesting details about what life is like in Flea Bottom. We see children roughly age 10 being forced to fight in a pit, and they get their teeth filed down into points to make them more vicious. And we see a little blonde-haired kid sitting in the corner, and it's implied that it's probably a bastard child of Aegon. And while this hunt's underway, we see that the two Erics are already divided politically about which side they should be fighting for. But finally, through Mysaria, a.k.a. the White Worm, they learn where Aegon is, but she's only willing to share that information if Otto makes a commitment to try to make some improvements to Flea Bottom, which is basically like the ghetto of King's Landing. So when Aegon's finally found, I don't know which Eric gets in a fight with Cole, but I'll just say Eric because I can't get it wrong. I don't know if it's Eric with an A or Eric with an E, but one of them fights Cole while Aemond chases down his older brother, tackles him. They basically capture him and drag him back for his coronation. And we see that Criston Cole is going to be named the new Lord Commander, and that whether he likes it or not, Aegon is going to be king, and he will wield Blackfire. And Blackfire is the ancient Valyrian blade that his ancestor Aegon the Conqueror wielded when he and his two sisters/wives first conquered Westeros. But while this hunt is taking place, we get some interesting scenes back in the Red Keep where we see Alicent meeting with Clubfoot. And Clubfoot basically tells her that Otto will always be able to outmaneuver her because he controls this network of spies, but that if she wishes, he can kind of take control over that network of spies. And then we got a really weird little sexual moment which was inserted into the show, which has no resemblance to anything from the book, but we see that Clubfoot has like a foot fetish, and so Alicent looks away while he has a wank while looking at her ankles. And I don't know if that's because one of his ankles doesn't quite work the way it should, but felt a little weird and random. But who knows, maybe this is the first of many strange kinky encounters between the two of them, because moving forward Clubfoot will be very loyal to Alicent. So it felt shoved in, but who knows, maybe it's building towards something more interesting down the road, because the show has been strangely asexual throughout most of the season, so I guess they felt like they needed to inject a little bit of perversity. But another scene involving Alicent is one where she's asking Rhaenys to help her guide the men in their lives toward peace, where you can see that Alicent, she doesn't really mind the idea of Rhaenyra being stepped over. However, she feels like it's up to women like Rhaenys and Alicent to make sure that people like Otto and Aegon, the second of his name, don't constantly to kind of push the entire realm towards war. But we never really get to see what decision Rhaenys was going to make, because one of the Erics decides to betray the Greens and freeze Rhaenys, and they're running through the city trying to get the hell out of Dodge, and he's basically telling her that it's going to be impossible to retrieve her dragon because it's going to be heavily guarded. However, the entire city is being kind of corralled and shepherded towards the dragon pit, so when Rhaenys realizes what's happening, she just smiles and just goes with the flow. So then we get this massive coronation scene in the dragon pit. And I hate to keep bringing up Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power and how it's so weak in comparison to this show, but I was making fun of the coronation scene of Halbrand, I think in episode 7. This is how you do a coronation scene where it actually feels believable that somebody's becoming king of a realm. And I love the way all the guards were interacting with their swords as Aegon approached this platform where he was going to be crowned. And for the first time, Aegon realizes it might kind of be cool to be the king because people start cheering and he gets kind of fired up and he holds Blackfire up in the air. And that's when all hell breaks loose. And this is the one big departure from the book where I'm kind of two minds, where I get that they felt like they needed some spectacle to bring this episode to a close, but it doesn't quite make sense in terms of what Rhaenys was seeking to accomplish in terms of just exploding through the ground with her dragon, killing a bunch of people in the process, not killing her enemies, and then flying away. And so, yeah, that was not in the book. And my thinking was, if they wanted to put this in, well, then she should have at least tried to kill Aegon and Aemond and Otto and all of them. Because in the book, what happened is Aegon the second of his name, he gets crowned and he hops on his dragon Sunfire and he flies around King's Landing a few times. And Sunfire is renowned as the most beautiful dragon that's ever been seen. It's completely gold with like pink membranes in its wings. It's a very rare, beautiful dragon. But instead, they had Rhaenys burst through the floor, killing a bunch of just random people in the process, which for me seems inconsistent with her character. And it also seems inconsistent that she wouldn't just go all the way at that point and just take out all the people, because if she had decided to just let her dragon cut loose, well, then there would be no war and a lot of lives would be spared and Rhaenyra would take the throne and so on and so forth. So in the context of the show, she will come to regret her decision, showing restraint and not killing all the Greens then and there. But I'm sure there are tons of people out there who are like, who gives a shit? It was cool to see a dragon burst through the floor and kill a lot of people. And I get that. I just feel like for a show that has such great writing across the board, one episode after another, that scene just felt a little, I guess, ham-fisted. But nonetheless, I will totally forgive it, because in the teaser for the next episode, they hinted that one of my favorite scenes from the entire book is going to be in the season finale. And I've been kind of wondering where the show would stop in the narrative in terms of when the Dance of the Dragons officially begins. And all I'll say is the scene that I'm really looking forward to involves Rain and Storm's End and Lucerys. And this time next week, you'll know what I mean, because if they capture even like 10% of how cool that scene is in the book, people are going to be talking about the season finale for a fucking year. In any case, as I like to say, this show is absolutely remarkable because every single episode has either been good or great. There hasn't been a crap episode yet, and while I might have my complaints about this episode, it was still wildly entertaining. I mean, I was sitting there on the edge of my seat, drinking my tea, just like, fuck yeah, like, bring it on. This is a show that just makes people feel bloodthirsty, and that's why I am kind of always drawn to Daemon and Aemond. I think those guys are just such bloodthirsty bastards, and I just can't wait. I can't wait to see them kill lots and lots of people as this war gets underway. But before I go, a very important question to ask you from Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. If you've not yet heard Wrong Reel, go check it out. But does your happy trail look more like a happy highway? Does your bush peek out over your fence? If you had to even think about the answer, you need the revolutionary products from Manscaped. Success is when preparation meets opportunity, and Manscaped's Platinum Package will make sure you're prepared when opportunity strikes. Join the 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with the code WRONGREEL. That is WRONGREEL in all caps. If you like my podcast or you like my channel, buying a kit from Manscaped is the best possible way to support my endeavors, and you will thank me when your partner, whomever they are, thanks you for the grooming that you enjoy with these products. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this sucker up. Hope everyone has an amazing week. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode, and I can't wait to talk about the season finale with all of you this time next week. So remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out if you want to talk about fantasy or this show or whatever the case might be. But that's all I got. So as always, onwards and upwards.